Okay, here we are back on our transect again, and for the second, this is week 4 now. You need to find the same flag where you started. Of course, if you did week 3 and 4 together, then you'll know where it is. But anyway, this is the 75-meter pole, so if that was yours, this is where you'll be. And I've laid out the same transect going at 90 degrees to the blue baseline. I put my red flags every 5 meters to 20 meters. So there's one blue flag and 4 red flags. But now I've done something a little bit different. We're going to measure the characteristics of the forest understory this time. And to do that, I need to take measurements to find the scale. So I've laid out an extra set of pin flags. So in this case, the first 5 meters, I flagged this every meter, and I'm going to collect data in 1 meter units. And having done that, I'll go on and do the next flag the next 5 meters and do that. So I'll be going 1 meter, 2 meters, 3 meters, 4 meters, 5 meters, then start over with 6 meters. So that's how it's going to be done. But what am I going to do? Well, I'm going to use a technique that doesn't actually have a plot for the herbaceous, for the lowest canopy, the level of vegetation here. I'm simply going to use a line. So it's a one-dimensional set of measurements. So what I'm going to do is find plants that intersect my line, and the line is the tape. So, and I'm going to pretend that it has no width. It wouldn't if I turned it on its side. So I'm going to record the distance, the number of centimeters that each category of plants takes up within this first meter unit. So here's I've also got another tape here, you see. This one, it's laid out on the ground, so you can use that one, or sometimes might be easier to use this one, for instance, for that fern. There's a fern crossing the line, so I think this would be easier to say that how much of the line did it cross? That much, 25 centimeters. So, wait a minute, it's got more than that. That's 25 plus this bit here, so it's 25 plus 10, so it's 35 centimeters of fern. Ferns are one of our categories, and we have lots and lots and lots of them, and it's the sword fern, one of the most characteristic understory plants of Pacific Northwest forests. So anyway, I just did that. That was what did I say? I can't hear you. Oh, 35, that's right. So I'm going to have a data sheet, and where it says meter 10 to 1, I'm going to put ferns 35 centimeter. So once we've got all 20 units done, then you can just enter the data, and we'll be able to calculate the percent cover of different kinds of understory vegetation. So that was ferns. I've got other categories. So an important one is grass. There's not very much of it, but be sure you don't miss it. Here's the grass right here, you see. And it's not actually intersecting at that point. But anywhere it intersects, don't ignore it. If it were just like that, give it whatever it is, half a centimetre or a centimetre, but don't leave it out. Why? Because this is no ordinary grass. This is the highly invasive false brome grass, and we'll be looking at that later in an area where it's really infested the forest, and you can compare this place with that place, but only if you assiduously record the grass cover. So the other categories are moss. So lots of moss, big fat Oregon forest mosses. I won't tell you what they all are, but there's actually not that many. There's mostly two or three species that you're going to be encountering, but they'll form a nice soft bed on the forest floor. So if we look down here, for instance, you can see they're getting a bit dried up, but you can see there's moss cover, and we can measure the moss cover, and we're going to call it doody 10, 20. I'm going to call that 25 centimeters of moss. Grass was zilch, but I was looking out for it carefully. And then we're going to look at herbaceous plants. We have lots of them here. I'll photograph all their leaves so you can see what they are, but we're actually going to lump them together into a single category. So if we look down here, right by the very starting point, we have leaves. We have that leaf, we have this leaf, we have that leaf. These are all different things. This is a bedstraw, a gallium species. This is a cardamine in the cabbage family, and this is a thing called Montia Claytonia, spring beauty. So right there's 3 different ones, but I'm just going to call them one. So remember, okay, this is very important, when we're lumping them all together, the total possible cover for that group is, did you guess it? It's at 100% for the group, okay? So this is, if there's one herb on top of another herb, which is also on top of a third kind of herb, and in 5 centimeters, you don't put down 15 centimeters, it's just 5, because, you know, within that area, the herbaceous cover is 100%. It can't go above that. So the way we're doing this, you know, we could have 100% cover of ferns, 100% cover of moss, and 100% cover of herbaceous. That's, but, you know, because we're measuring each layer that we've defined here. But for each layer, the total possible percentage is 100%. So that may be a bit confusing. Another thing here is that we're using the zone of influence. Remember how beautifully you all did on your zone of influence measurements in the, which lab was it? The first one. So when we're looking at cover, this is why we have the zone of influence. Look at this leaf here, you see. It's got holes in it, it's got gaps between the fronds. What's the cover of that thing? Well, if we were really wanted to know exactly, we'd have to measure that one, then the gap, then this one. So that's why we're using the zone of influence. We're just taking the leaf, the fern here, as a single entity, assuming that it doesn't actually have the gaps, and use the zone of influence to make our lives easier. You know, it's much easier just to say, oh yeah, that, fern, rather than, oh, fern, gap, fern, gap, fern, gap, fern, gap. So, that's what you do. You just go down your transect, you're down 1 meter. We've recorded the herbaceous material. I said there was 6 centimeters of that, 25 centimeters of moss, and no grass. There's almost a grass. Look, but leave that out. Ferns, we had 35 centimeters, and yeah, I think we'll leave out. We could measure the open sticks and litter, but I'm going to leave that off. It's too complicated with the ferns present, because you know, it's hard to decide whether the litter is actually open litter or litter under a fern. So we'll leave that one out. If we could do it easily, it would be a good indicator, because that gives us the actual total cover of all the others together. So if we had, say, 70% ferns, 70% moss, and, well, 30% open duff, we'd know that the ferns and the moss were actually occupying the same area. But anyway, we're not going to do that. So that's your categories. You've got your ferns, you've got your grass, you've got your moss, and your herbaceous vegetation. So there's blackberry vines here, and there's also little tree seedlings, but we'll just call all of those herbaceous vegetation. So, I'll just have a look at this next. That's the meter. I record this and then I'm going to go on to the next 1 meter. There it is. I've got my line. There's going to be lots of ferns. I've got a stick stuck in the middle of it. We'll just ignore that. So I'm going to have to measure my fern cover. It's high. So I'll leave out that bit. It doesn't really have much in it. So we've got this part here. I can just do it 2 meters to, that's 10, 20, 30. Well, I say it's probably easier using this one. And then what are we going to have down here? We're going to have a layer of ferns right there. It's another 20 centimeters of fern. And a gap. That's not actually, you see right there isn't actually any fern. So we have, 30 and 20, that's 50 centimeters of fern cover. And not much else in this section. We've got some moss, kind of hard to see it down there. There's hardly any moss, no grass, and I don't actually see any herbaceous plants. So maybe a couple of centimeters of moss and fern. And the rest of it would just be sort of open leaf litter. So that's 2 of those. And that's how we're going to measure the under the lowest level of the canopy, but we're not actually going to stop there. We're going to take the next layer as well. So remember that we measured trees above 30 centimeters circumference. Well, we're also going to measure or count the other woody plants as well. Anything that's up above whatever our minimum cutoff was, a meter, 1.3 meters, we're going to score it. So, and we're going to score it if it is within a certain distance of this measure. So anything within 1 meter, you get to include it as a shrub, or a sapling or a shrub. So that's 1 meter both sides. So this is in, see, so I'm going to record this as 1. That's a tree shrub layer, 0 to 30 centimeters circumference. I've got 1 shrub. I'm going to count this as 1, even though it's got several different stems, you see. It's got multiple stems there. And I'm going to call it its name, because I happen to know what it is. This shrub is called ocean spray, or holodiscus. So I've got 1 of those, 1 holodiscus. And look out for tree saplings, because this is supposed to be a forest, so the trees are supposed to regenerate. And one question we can ask is, how well are they regenerating, and which ones are regenerating? So we could look at the canopy and say, Douglas fir, yay! Grand fir, yay! Underneath, big leaf maple. So if those trees disappeared for some reason, and the forest regenerated from the saplings present, or the smaller trees, what would come back? What kind of forest would we have? Would it look like this forest, or would it be a different forest? So be sure to find the saplings. There are a few, it's not very many, and you'll probably find quite a lot of big leaf maple. There's one there. They're not actually open up yet. It's got opposite branching over here. That is a little big leaf maple, so that would come in our, if it were in, which it isn't, if it were in the 1 meter, it would be in our 0 to 30 centimeters sample, 1 maple. And over here, you'd think it was Christmas or something, because there's a holly tree right there. So if that were in the sample, we count that as a holly tree, and that is invasive, it's not non-native, which is, so both of these are interesting, the invasive grass and the invasive holly, because these old growth forests are actually very resistant to invasion by exotic species. They're much more resistant than, say, the grasslands, where some of them are almost 100% cover of non-natives. Anyway, that's your data sheet. So you'll come home with two sets of data. One's going to be 20 1-meter sections with herbaceous and fern cover, and then a list of all the trees, the saplings and the shrubs, within 1 meter either side of your line. So have fun with that one, and if you have time, you can do this after you've done your tree plot. So you can do both of them on the same day and be done with 2 weeks worth of labs. Or you can come back and do it later, doesn't matter. Your choice, but either way it's going to be beautiful out here, and you're really going to enjoy the sunshine, hopefully, and the lovely fresh air. Thank you.